I don't want to watch that Michael Jackson thing. First of all, it's weird because he's not alive. He's not alive to defend himself, so it's weird. It's also stories, and people tell the truth in stories sometimes, and sometimes they don't, and you don't know.
Netflix wanted the verdict to feel like the final chapter in the Michael Jackson story. But there's one major problem. No single documentary can rewrite an entire history. The real issue isn't just what Netflix chooses to say about Michael Jackson. It's what the film asks viewers to overlook. The contradictions that emerged over the years. The court case he ultimately won. The unanswered questions surrounding the accusations. And perhaps most importantly, the fact that Michael Jackson is no longer here to defend himself or challenge the claims being made. A one-sided narrative may be powerful, but it cannot erase the complete record. To understand the truth, audiences must look beyond a single documentary and examine every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every chapter of the story for themselves.
So why do we need a biopic not a biopic. Why do we need a documentary in the middle of this that goes back 21 years in a case where he was completely exonerated?
Joe Rogan and Brendan Schaub have both expressed skepticism about the documentary, arguing that Michael Jackson is no longer alive to respond to the allegations or defend his reputation. They also highlight that some accusers previously made statements denying any wrongdoing before later presenting different accounts. Because of these inconsistencies, many viewers remain unconvinced by the documentary's conclusions. For those critics, the film does not feel like a complete examination of the facts. Instead, they see it as a revival of long-standing controversies, presented without enough context and shaped through selective editing that leaves important questions unanswered.
The guy's dead.
He can't defend himself.
Have some respect, Schaub.
Here's the thing. Those two dudes who were doing it, one was the key witness when he got away in court.
What dudes?
The dudes in the documentary, the two are we got molested. The one was the number one key witness who's saying he didn't get molested.
Okay, well then he shouldn't be able to say anything.
And both of them were witnesses.
Because that means they should go to jail.
And now they're like, well, no, that's not true. We were young. We were 20.
How old was he? He was in his 20s?
Yeah.
Well, also, isn't that perjury? It means he lied in court?
Be fucked.
You can't lie in court either way, one way or the other. You can't lie to protect somebody, and you can't lie to accuse someone either. You can't lie.
I don't know what the deal is with that.
I mean, that seems like that's something they could drag him to court for.
And the Jackson came out and went, well, isn't it convenient? You guys are coming out now when you're in financial trouble.
Rogan's earlier remarks focus on what he sees as a key issue in the controversy. He questions situations where individuals maintain one version of events for years and then present a different account after receiving renewed public attention through documentaries or media coverage. According to this perspective, the debate surrounding Michael Jackson cannot be settled by emotion alone. It requires careful consideration of timelines, consistency, and credibility. The central question is whether audiences are being presented with the full scope of the evidence, or only the most dramatic elements that generate the strongest reactions. For many observers, that distinction is crucial when evaluating such a complex and heavily debated story.
What is your take on that documentary? I have not watched it, but I've heard that those two guys had testified saying that nothing had ever happened to them before this, and then now they're down on their luck, and now they've changed their tune and saying that it was...
They go into that in detail in the doc, and basically they'd been replaced by the new young boy, and had been kind of kicked to the side. And then Michael reached out and said, I need you to help me. And they say it was exciting, the idea to be back in Michael's good books and be wanted by Michael again.
Attorney Brian Oxman pushes the criticism even further, directing his concerns at the documentary itself. In his view, the film presents a narrative that overlooks important facts and details that deserve closer examination. Oxman argues that the story being presented appears straightforward on the surface, but becomes far more complicated when the full timeline and available evidence are taken into account. According to him, key context is missing, making it difficult to evaluate the claims without considering the broader record. From this perspective, the debate is not simply about the allegations themselves, but about whether viewers are being given all the information necessary to reach an informed conclusion.
I think it is the same hatchet job that we have seen in other documentaries where people who have no clue, no understanding, no knowledge of the facts of the case come in and cry crocodile tears. Oh, the boy, he made such a convincing story. Look, you haven't seen the evidence, the documents, the presentation of where these people were, where Michael Jackson were. He was never together with this family.
Oxman goes on to describe what he says has been especially difficult for the Jackson family. From their perspective, Michael Jackson is no longer here to respond to the allegations, offer his side of the story, or challenge claims that continue to be discussed years after his death. He argues that this absence creates an imbalance, because Michael cannot participate in the conversation or defend himself against accusations that have resurfaced in documentaries and media coverage. Oxman has also stated that, based on his own experience and observations, he never witnessed any inappropriate behavior. He further maintains that the evidence he reviewed did not support the conclusion that Michael Jackson harmed children, emphasizing that this remains a central point in the ongoing debate surrounding the case.
He's your child. He's your brother, your sisters. They look at this and go, I never saw anything. But most important, the evidence showed that Michael did not touch these children. He has never hurt a child.
Tom Mesereau then shifts the discussion back to the courtroom, where he believes the strongest counterargument to the documentary can be found. He emphasizes that the jurors were not evaluating a condensed, edited presentation. Instead, they spent months hearing testimony, reviewing evidence, and examining the case in detail before reaching their decision. Mesereau's argument is that a documentary and a courtroom operate very differently. While a film can focus on selected moments to support a particular narrative, a trial requires evidence to be tested through extensive examination and cross-examination. His central point is that any account claiming to present the complete story should also address the challenges, contradictions, and disputed evidence that emerged during the trial. Without that broader context, critics argue that viewers may not be seeing the full picture behind one of the most debated cases in modern entertainment history.
The jury deliberated for 8 days. They had seen almost 5 months of testimony. They had been in trial 5 days a week during those 5 months. They deliberated 8 days, and they came back with not guilty on every felony count and every misdemeanor count. 14 times they said not guilty. He was totally exonerated. So why are we going through a documentary on this? What's the point? I don't think we need a documentary on this. I think there've been enough, and I didn't want to participate in it because we don't need it. He was exonerated. The jury couldn't have sent a stronger message.
Do you feel there's been a kind of commercial whirlwind around this issue, that people have raced to make money out of it, to be blunt?
Well, that's what it is. The media, I'm not including everybody, the media tends to want to glorify salacious allegations. They don't like to spend time on the counter argument. So the media and this documentary spends time on very dramatic, disturbing, salacious allegations and doesn't do justice to the problems with the prosecution's witnesses and the prosecution's case. For example, there's no mention of Chris Tucker, who was our last witness, the famous comedian and actor.
This is why the debate continues to generate strong reactions. Many critics argue that a documentary covering such a serious and controversial subject should examine every side of the story with equal scrutiny. From their perspective, powerful personal accounts and dramatic presentation alone are not enough to establish the full truth. They believe that any investigation of this magnitude should also test the credibility of claims, examine timelines carefully, and address inconsistencies wherever they appear. The argument is that audiences deserve a complete picture, one that explores both supporting and conflicting evidence, so viewers can reach their own conclusions based on the strongest facts available, rather than on emotion or selective storytelling alone.
Strong concerns about whether a couple of these accusers are credible. the stories they're telling, whether they're credible, and in particular in that so-called documentary that was done called Leaving Neverland, whether the filmmaker did the audience a disservice by not raising the very clear credibility questions of the two witnesses who were the main players in that movie. The problem for this story and making up your mind is that everyone who has publicly accused Michael Jackson, everyone, save for the last four who just came out, the Casio family, like a month ago, because we just haven't really, no one's really looked into them. But everyone has serious credibility problems. And I don't want to beat up on these guys if they were actually the survivors of molestation. That's the last thing you want to do, but you have an obligation in telling the story, to look at the other side, at least if you're going to call yourself a documentary.
Another criticism directed at the documentary is that it appears to revisit a case that already reached a legal conclusion. Critics argue that, by focusing heavily on the allegations, the film can leave viewers with the impression that the courtroom outcome remains unresolved, despite Michael Jackson's acquittal. According to this viewpoint, the documentary goes beyond simply reviewing a controversial chapter in history. Instead, it is seen as encouraging audiences to re-examine and reconsider a case that has already been decided in court. For those who hold this perspective, the result is that the film begins to feel less like a retrospective documentary and more like a renewed public trial, one taking place in the court of public opinion rather than inside an actual courtroom.
Now, I know Netflix doesn't care about the truth. They just want people to talk about their show. The series comes about 1 week ahead of the 21st anniversary of Michael Jackson being acquitted of all 14 of those charges on June 13th, 2005. And for some reason, Netflix wants to spin this conversation up like that verdict was controversial. And I say for no reason, but we all know the reason is that the Michael Jackson biopic has been a huge success, taking over the box office, as well as skyrocketing his music back to the top of the chart.
The discussion then turns to the issue of settlements, another point that has generated significant debate among critics of the documentary. According to these critics, the film references settlements in a way that may lead some viewers to interpret them as evidence of guilt, while not fully explaining their legal significance. They argue that settlements can occur for many reasons and do not, by themselves, constitute a criminal conviction or a finding of wrongdoing by a court. This distinction is important because settlements often have a powerful impact on public perception. While they can influence how people view a case, critics contend that they should not automatically be treated as proof of guilt without the broader legal context being clearly explained.
Episode 1 also introduces us to Diane Diamond, who's an investigative reporter. All right, be serious. She first brings up the 1993 settlement. Of course, she doesn't mention that it was not an admission of guilt and didn't prevent a criminal trial. But okay, her point, in her words, is that, and I quote, in the case of the Arvizos, they never went for the money.
Some of the most serious criticism emerges when opponents of the documentary argue that certain pieces of evidence are presented in a misleading way. They claim that material connected to Michael Jackson, including artwork and other archived items, is interpreted through a lens that encourages suspicion rather than providing neutral context. Critics also contend that editing choices can influence how audiences perceive older information, making events or evidence appear more incriminating than they may have seemed when originally examined. Because of this, the debate extends far beyond the loyalty of Michael Jackson's fanbase. At its core, the controversy centers on a broader question, whether the documentary presents information fairly and completely, or whether selective framing has shaped the audience's understanding of the case in a way that alters its original context and meaning.
When that interview drops, the media runs with this idea that it's so weird that Mike is sitting with this kid holding his hands. People are in a frenzy. Also, if you watch the Netflix doc, they shamelessly edit the scene about Gavin talking about sharing his bed with Michael. Gavin and Michael Jackson never, I repeat, never shared a bed. People seem to get very hung up on this, but there's a huge difference. Here's the Netflix clip.
He finally said, okay, if you love me, to sleep on the bed. I was like, oh man.
You can see it.
could look at that moment and watch your documentary.
I stood in there. I asked him if I could stay in his bedroom. And he let me stay in the bedroom. And I was like, Michael, you can sleep on the bed. And he was like, no, you sleep on the bed, sleep on the bed. We're like, no, you sleep on the bed. And then he finally said, okay, if you love me, you sleep on the bed. I was like, oh man. And so I finally slept on the bed. But it was fun that night.
I slept on the floor.
Michael is offering his bed for the kid to sleep in, while Michael Jackson sleeps on the floor. Not to mention, Michael's kids were also reportedly there, as well as other adults. Also, please note that Michael Jackson's bedroom was 3,000 square feet. His bedroom. How big is your house? But would you believe that none of that even mattered?